Back in August 1917, a team of British tank operators found themselves immobilised in the sludge, smack in the heart of no man's land. The events that unfolded during the ensuing 3 days read like a terrifying nightmare. But precisely what occurred to them, and did they make it out alive? By late 1914, the Western Front had evolved into an unforeseen quagmire. An unbroken chain of fortifications stretched from Belgium's shoreline to the Swiss frontier, and the conflict anticipated to conclude swiftly had stalled entirely. The core challenge boiled down to one key factor. Firepower had advanced dramatically, yet battlefield tactics lagged far behind. Machine guns and shelling could shred any target exposed in the open. Consequently, troops from opposing sides entrenched themselves and held position. The result? Endless stretches of ditches, shell holes, and dense barbed wire barriers separated by a barren wasteland dubbed no man's land. Conventional strategies, like assembling foot soldiers for frontal assaults or deploying mounted charges to pierce lines, proved futile. Gunners in fortified spots could decimate attacking formations long before they neared. Thus, the forces remained deadlocked, glaring across the void, without viable paths forward. Unsurprisingly, commanders experimented with various tactics to shatter this impasse. One early plan involved intensified barrages, hammering foe positions for extended periods to shred wire, bury shelters, and pave the way for infantry pushes. Yet outcomes seldom matched expectations. German fortifications featured robust concrete bunkers that withstood fierce barrages. As soon as fire ceased, occupants resurfaced, weapons primed. Moreover, the blast churned the terrain into a chaotic slurry of intersecting pits, complicating attackers' progress even more. Alternative methods emerged as well, including chemical agents, elite raiding squads, and nocturnal incursions. Still, they yielded minimal impact. The underlying dilemma persisted: how to transport personnel over mere hundreds of yards of exposed territory amid lethal defences. By the major pushes of 1916 and 1917, it was evident that absent revolutionary innovations, progress would demand staggering casualties and likely prove ephemeral. This realisation sparked a radical shift in thinking. Why not engineer a device to traverse the chaos outright? Envision a fortified vehicle impervious to small arms fire, weighty enough to crush wire entanglements, and built to span ditches without faltering. Arm it with weaponry, and it could deliver direct fire to adversaries while sparing mass human losses. The concept wasn't entirely novel. H.G. Wells had envisioned "zero" in his 1903 tale. But the brutal reality of static warfare provided the impetus to realise it. Fortunately, by then, tech had advanced sufficiently. Robust motors were feasible, continuous track designs from agriculture could adapt, and armoured plating was producible. All components were at hand. It simply required assembly. Britain took the lead, albeit through an unconventional route. In late 1914, Lieutenant Ernest Swinton advocated for an armoured vehicle suited to surmounting trenches. He pitched the notion to Winston Churchill, then heading the Admiralty and overseeing naval affairs rather than ground forces. Churchill grasped its promise instantly. In spring 1915, he drafted a note outlining how to retrofit tractors with protected crew spaces and guns, render them impervious to bullets, and equip tracks for seamless trench navigation, essentially blueprinting the modern tank. He formed a clandestine Admiralty panel, dubbed the Landships Committee, to develop models. Oddly, this placed the Royal Navy at the helm of a terrestrial weapon. The ground forces, meanwhile, showed scant interest. So the Admiralty proceeded discreetly, bypassing the War Office entirely. When the Army assumed control toward the close of 1915, confidentiality was paramount, demanding a ruse. They opted for "1", evoking water storage vats. Should inquiries arise about the contents of those hulking steel forms being transported secretly by rail, The cover story claimed they were merely water pumps heading to Russia, and that moniker ended up enduring forever. Progress continued amid the doubts, and before long the initial prototype emerged. Dubbed Little Willie, it was a squat, rectangular contraption with tracks encircling its frame. It managed basic mobility and housed a team, yet it struggled to cross the broad ditches typical of the Western Front. Engineers overhauled it entirely from scratch. The updated model stretched longer, featuring a signature rhomboid form where the tracks fully enveloped the body and projected forward and rearward into elevated sections, ideal for scaling and descending into ditches. They named this iteration Mother. During trials in early 1916, it proved functional. That configuration set the standard outline for future tanks. Even prior to locking in the final blueprints for manufacturing, authorities commissioned 100 units. Midway through 1916, the inaugural batch rolled out. Known as Mark I models, they appeared in two variants. The quote 2 type sported side-mounted sponsons with twin 6-pounder guns plus machine guns. The quote 3_1s relied solely on machine guns, geared mainly toward combating hostile foot soldiers. That summer, every unit shipped off to France in utmost confidentiality. The British wasted no time testing their potential in combat. Come September 1916, amid the Somme campaign, they deployed them earnestly. Plans called for 49 to spearhead an assault on Flers-Courcelette. Troubles arose even before confronting the foe. These primitive machines were so prone to faults that fewer than half reached the launch point as the push began. Those that pressed on, however, sparked near chaos among the Germans. Troops hardened by 2 years of a familiar conflict abruptly beheld these massive iron beasts emerging from the haze, lumbering across bomb holes, crushing barbed wire, and unleashing bursts of gunfire en route. Many bolted in terror or discarded arms and yielded instantly from their positions. The mental toll was undeniable, and several helped seize key targets. Yet it fell short of the decisive shift optimists envisioned. Top speed hovered at a mere 3 to 4 miles per hour, and malfunctions plagued them constantly. Once the initial surprise faded, the Germans swiftly realized shells could obliterate them with precise strikes. Post-battle, their leaders scorned the contraptions as crude and futile. Undeterred, the British refined the blueprint. By 1917, the Mark V arrived as the war's primary armoured vehicle through its central phase. Appearance-wise, it resembled predecessors, but internal upgrades mattered. Beefier plating, a repositioned fuel reserve to curb blaze hazards, and sturdier parts less apt to seize up disastrously. They affixed an unditching beam atop, a hefty timber spar the operators could link to the treads should the vehicle bog down in muck. By November 1917, with ample stock and bolstered assurance, the British aimed higher at Cambrai, committing over 370 in a stealthy barrage against the Hindenburg Line. Day 1 yielded stunning gains. The vehicles breached several defensive layers, surging beyond 5 miles in spots. Following offensives that tallied advances in mere yards at the cost of countless casualties, 5 miles in hours seemed miraculous. Briefly, it appeared armour could shatter the impasse. Reality intruded soon enough, though. Vehicles stalled or fell to recovered German guns one by one. Lacking sufficient follow-up troops to secure the turf, the British couldn't consolidate. 10 days on, a German riposte reclaimed nearly all. Now consider the reality aboard those nascent tanks. It illuminates the ordeal crews endured over days in no man's land. A Mark V held 8 souls crammed into a metal enclosure about 8 metres long by 2.5 wide. No isolated power section divided personnel from the guts. The 100-horsepower gasoline engine, a thunderous beast, occupied the heart of the compartment amid the bustle. Upon firing, the din drowned out all else. Operators yelled into neighbours' ears for simple directives. Then intense heat plagued the tank's interior. Crew spaces routinely soared to 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, far exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Compounding the sweltering conditions, toxic fumes had no escape route. Carbon monoxide from the engine and exhaust mingled with greasy smoke in the atmosphere. Firing a weapon added cordite vapours to the mix. All these hazards simply built up within the sealed confines. Following prolonged missions, team members would stumble out gasping for clean air. Many retched violently, while others dropped to the ground in exhaustion. They dubbed it tank sickness, and survivors claimed it surpassed the worst bouts of seasickness imaginable. Operating such a vehicle presented its own grueling challenge. No wheel guided the direction. The operator perched in the front area, managing clutch and brake controls, but couldn't pivot the machine solo. 2 additional personnel, known as gearsmen, handled each track separately, requiring the trio to synchronize via yells or gestures amid pitch blackness for any maneuver. A single error could halt the tank abruptly or dislodge a track, stranding it exposed in the field. Visibility was severely limited too. In battle mode, with hatches secured, the driver's view came through a narrow opening just inches across. He struggled to discern even the immediate path ahead. This led to seldom discussed mishaps. Vehicles sometimes rolled straight over injured troops in craters or crushed friendly foot soldiers amid the din and disorder. When projectiles struck the exterior, they dislodged interior metal shards that ricocheted wildly, injuring anyone in their path. Crews referred to this as spawing. Lead splash posed another threat. A rifle round glancing off the plating might melt on contact, sending molten bits through the viewing ports. Countless soldiers lost their sight this way. In response, British forces later distributed protective masks, steel panels with dangling chainmail to shield the jaw and throat, evoking a medieval appearance. Yet donning such gear in a stifling 120-degree enclosure, devoid of ventilation and thick with accumulating gases, overwhelmed many. They opted to go without, and some suffered disfiguring consequences. On the opposing side, Germans devised methods to neutralize these armoured beasts. Initially, they lacked effective means, as ordinary bullets simply ricocheted harmlessly. By 1917, however, they introduced specialised anti-armour projectiles featuring toughened steel penetrators, capable of breaching lighter plating at short distances. As these proved ineffective against the reinforced hulls of the Mark V, they deployed a hefty 13mm anti-tank rifle, launching solid steel cord rounds that pierced up to 20mm of protection. Shellfire proved even deadlier. A solid artillery strike from a field piece could obliterate a tank in an instant. Consider the fate of the crew in a tank dubbed Frei Bentos during August 1917. This Mark V male received its moniker from the crew, mirroring a common practice then, inspired by a favoured canned meat brand. It supported Allied advances near the hamlet of St. Julian, situated northeast of Ypres, amid the infamous Passchendaele campaign. Most recollections of that clash highlight the quagmire. Relentless rains had liquefied the terrain into something unrecognisable as soil. No man's land resembled a bog of interconnected craters, brimming with water and yielding mud, deep enough to engulf soldiers entirely. On August 22nd, Frei Bentos attempted to traverse this morass in the pre-dawn hours. The team advanced alongside the troops starting around 4:40 a.m. Right away, a German machine gun unleashed from a dug-in site the British labelled Somme Farm. Following protocol, the operators swung the port-sponson 6-pounder to bear and shelled the spot until silence fell. Pressing on to their subsequent target, a fortified hillock named Gallipoli, they neared it by about 5:45 when fresh gunfire erupted from that vantage. En route to engage, the tank encountered a concealed hazard amid the devastated landscape, a profound crater invisible until too late. Frei Bentos plunged in, veered sharply starboard with one track lifting free while the other bogged down in the muck. Immobile, they faced immediate peril as a round pierced a vision slot, striking Second Lieutenant George Hill in the throat. He slumped from his position, hemorrhaging profusely. Captain D. Lieutenant Donald Richardson, the commander, made a desperate grab for the controls to adjust the tank's tilt before it sank any further. However, Hill had slumped over the steering gear, and in the tight confines no one could disentangle the mess fast enough. The vehicle slipped deeper into the crater and came to a halt. Now tilted awkwardly between the opposing front lines, it drew concentrated German gunfire. Inside, the team assessed their predicament. That day, there were 9 crew members aboard, including an extra for managing the carrier pigeons, and 3 were already injured from the initial moments. The pressing issue, though, was freeing the tank itself. Normally, they'd deploy the unditching beam, a process requiring someone to exit and secure it to the tracks for self-extraction. Sergeant Robert Misson ventured out the right sponson door with a chain in hand. But as soon as he emerged, he heard bullets ricocheting off the plating nearby. Glancing up, he spotted German troops roughly 30 yards off, rifles trained on him. He retreated inside without accessing the beam. From the left sponson, Lance Corporal Ernest Brady attempted the same manoeuvre. He exited and began attaching the equipment, only to be struck by machine gun bursts almost right away, before completing the task. Brady collapsed into the mud beside the tank and lay still. With him gone and Misson safely back, it became obvious that extracting the tank under German observation was impossible. Fray Bentos remained immobile, yet capable of combat. One of the 6-pounders was aimed uselessly into the dirt due to the slant, but the other could still swivel, supplemented by Lewis guns. Richardson opted to dig in and defend their spot. They aimed the functional gun at Gallipoli Farm, the source of the machine gun bursts, and unleashed shells at any movement, which for the moment deterred a German assault. Then, around 7 a.m., things deteriorated further. The British infantry push in the area collapsed, inflicting severe losses on the 61st Division, forcing a pullback to their original positions. This stranded Fray Bentos isolated in no man's land, canted and partially embedded with no Allied troops in sight. The tank had transformed into a lone outpost amid hostile ground. The Germans quickly grasped the opportunity. Patrols crept forward via shell holes, edging near for grenade throws, but the crew repelled them using available firepower. The trouble was the tank's pitch, which left gaps the fixed guns couldn't reach. When enemy troops slithered into a nearby abandoned trench, too low for the Lewis gun to depress adequately, Misson and his comrades fired rifles through the revolver port. At one stage, a German scaled the exterior and lobbed a grenade inside an aperture, but the team seized it and hurled it away just in time. By then, nearly all aboard bore wounds. Early hits had compounded with fresh ones from rounds penetrating vision slits and shrapnel scattering across inner surfaces. Only Gunner Binley remained unscathed. Through the slits, they could see Brady's corpse in the muck, tantalizingly close, yet untouchable. Worse still, shots now originated from the British side. Their comrades mistook the static tank for a German prize and opened fire, including snipers. Misson took action. He slipped out, navigated the exposed terrain under crossfire from both flanks, and alerted the infantry to cease, explaining his men were still inside and resisting. He then reversed course, crawling back to his team. That round trip through no man's land later earned acclaim as one of the war's boldest solo feats of bravery. Dusk fell on August 22nd, finding them still mired and encircled, but enduring. The night offered slight respite, though Germans launched flares and blasted at every noise. Escape was discussed, but venturing out seemed riskier than hunkering down under the tank's shelter, given the foe's proximity. The following day brought no improvement. On the 23rd and 24th, German counter-offensives swept the area, and whenever their forces approached to bypass or eliminate the beached tank, the crew repulsed them with every shot they could muster. Flamethrower squads edged in to ignite it, but despite their efforts to eject the enemy, nothing succeeded. Conditions inside the tank were deteriorating rapidly. Supplies of food and water had been depleted, as they'd only packed enough for a standard mission of about 1 day. Yet this ordeal had stretched into the 3rd day. Daytime temperatures scorched mercilessly, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the stench of blood, perspiration, lubricant, and all the accumulated filth from soldiers confined in a steel box, without facilities for hygiene. Bud blacked out for 2 hours due to his injuries at one stage, while the rest suffered from fatigue, frailty, and agony. Rest was nearly unattainable, as any attempt at slumber was interrupted by sudden volleys of shots or cries from the injured. Come the evening of August 24th, after nearly 60 hours trapped, Richardson took charge and resolved that survival beyond another day was impossible. Thus, under cover of darkness, they'd abandon the vehicle and attempt a stealthy retreat. Per their standing orders, surrendering an operational tank to the foe was forbidden, so prior to exit, they sabotaged key components. They extracted the breech mechanisms from the 6-pounders to render the cannons inoperable, and they collected the Lewis machine guns, leftover rounds, and other potentially valuable items for the Germans. Every soldier verified his sidearm, and shortly before 9 p.m. they started emerging. Sequentially, the 8 survivors slithered from Fray Bentos into the sludge. The Allied lines lay just a few hundred yards distant, across terrain pocked with waterlogged shell holes, where signal flares continued to illuminate the night and enemy fire targeted any stir. They advanced cautiously, even hauling the Lewis guns along instead of abandoning them. In the pre-dawn hours of August 25th, the full group reached safety, with British guards hauling them over the parapet individually. Before succumbing to exhaustion, they alerted a proximate rifle company to maintain suppressive fire on the forsaken tank, preventing German recovery. They'd endured 72 hours within it, 1 fatality, 7 casualties. Binley alone escaped unscathed, barring any mental toll. Once the official accounts were submitted, Fray Bentos's team earned distinction as the war's most honoured tank unit. Richardson and Hill were awarded the Military Cross, Miss and Morey the Distinguished Conduct Medal, while Hatton, Arthurs, Budd and Binley each got the Military Medal. Brady, slain in the opening hour amid the failed extraction, went unrewarded. His remains were never recovered, and his name endures on the Tyne-Cot Memorial beside almost 35,000 more vanished in the mire near Ypres.